This was back in the late 90s when I was just a kid. It was the 4th of July and my neighborhood was buzzing with excitement. Everyone was getting ready for the big celebration. But something strange happened that night. Something I'll never forget. It was a hot summer day, and all the kids on the block were running around, playing with sparklers and water balloons. The grown-ups were busy setting up the barbecue grills and decorating their houses with red, white, and blue. It was the kind of day that felt perfect, but then I noticed something odd. There was a man I had never seen before, just standing at the end of our street. He was tall and thin, wearing a long coat even though it was blazing hot outside. He had a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes, so I couldn't see his face clearly. He didn't join in on the fun or talk to anyone. He just stood there, watching. I pointed him out to my best friend, Jimmy. "Do you know who that guy is?" I asked. Jimmy shook his head. "Nope. He looks kind of creepy, don't you think?" We both agreed it was weird, but being kids, we quickly got distracted by the fireworks starting to go off in the distance. As the day turned to night, the stranger still stood there, watching intently as the block's festivities continued. It was like he was studying us, and it made me feel uneasy. Later that night, the big fireworks show began. Everyone gathered in the middle of the street, oohing and awing at the colorful explosions in the sky. I was standing with my parents, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. I turned around and saw the stranger, now closer, standing in the shadows. His eyes were fixed on me. I tugged on my mom's sleeve. "Mom, who's that man over there?" She glanced over but didn't seem too concerned. "I don't know, honey. Maybe he's just passing through." But I knew he wasn't just passing through. He had been there all day, watching. I tried to enjoy the fireworks, but my mind kept drifting back to the stranger. After the fireworks show, everyone started heading back to their homes. My parents were busy chatting with the neighbors, so I decided to go inside and use the bathroom. I ran up to my parents' bedroom because the one downstairs was always crowded during parties. As I walked into their room, I felt a cold breeze even though the windows were shut. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Something felt wrong. I turned to go to the bathroom, and that's when I saw him, the stranger, standing in the corner of my parents' bedroom. I froze. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. The man stepped forward, his eyes cold and empty. He didn't say a word, just stared at me with a creepy smile that sent shivers down my spine. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. I backed up slowly, my mind racing. How did he get in here? What did he want? My legs felt like jelly, but I forced myself to move. I bolted out of the room, down the stairs, and back outside to where my parents were. I was out of breath and shaking. "Mom, Dad, there's a man in your bedroom," I managed to gasp. My dad looked at me, confused. "What are you talking about?" "The stranger. The one from the street. He's in your room." My parents exchanged worried glances and rushed inside, with me right behind them. My dad threw open the bedroom door, but the room was empty. The window was open now, curtains fluttering in the breeze. The man was gone. They didn't find anyone, and they thought maybe I had imagined it or maybe someone had played a prank. But I knew what I saw. That man was real, and he had been in our house. We locked all the doors and windows, and my parents stayed up all night keeping watch. The next morning, we heard that other families had seen the stranger too, lurking around their houses, peering into windows. The police were called, but they never found him. It was like he had vanished into thin air. For weeks, I was scared to be alone, always looking over my shoulder, expecting to see the stranger's cold eyes watching me again. My parents tried to reassure me, but I could tell they were worried too. Eventually, life went back to normal. But every 4th of July since then, I remember that creepy man who watched us from the shadows. And it's been hard to really enjoy this particular holiday since. I've got a creepy story for you. It happened about 9 years ago, and it still gives me the chills. It was a 4th of July weekend, and my girlfriend Sarah and I decided to go camping. We thought it would be fun to get away from the city and enjoy some time in nature. We had no idea what was waiting for us. We found a nice spot to set up our tent near an old, run-down farmhouse. The place looked abandoned, but it had a certain charm to it. The roof was caved in, and the windows were broken, but it stood there, a silent reminder of the past. We didn't think much of it and started setting up our camp. The first day was perfect. We went for a hike, cooked hot dogs over the fire, and watched the sunset. As night fell, we settled into our tent, ready for a good night's sleep. That's when things started to get weird. Around midnight, I heard a strange noise coming from the direction of the farmhouse. It sounded like footsteps, but they were slow and heavy, like someone dragging their feet. I sat up, trying to listen more closely. "Did you hear that?" I whispered to Sarah. She rubbed her eyes and nodded. "Yeah, it's probably just an animal." I wanted to believe her, but the sound didn't stop. It kept getting closer, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped the tent. The beam of light cut through the darkness, but I couldn't see anything. The footsteps stopped as soon as I stepped outside. "See? Nothing there," Sarah said, trying to reassure me. I nodded and crawled back into the tent, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. Eventually, we both fell asleep, but it wasn't a restful night. The next morning, we decided to explore the old farmhouse. It seemed like a fun adventure, and we thought it might help us understand what we heard the night before. As we got closer, I felt a strange sense of dread. The air seemed colder, and the silence was unsettling. The door to the farmhouse creaked open with a gentle push. Inside, the place was a mess. Broken furniture, dusty old pictures, and cobwebs everywhere. It looked like no one had been there for years. We wandered through the rooms trying to imagine what life was like for the people who once lived there. In one of the rooms, we found an old, tattered journal. It belonged to the farmer who used to own the place. His name was Mr. Thompson, and as we read through the pages, we learned that he was a very angry man. He wrote about how he lost his family and how he cursed anyone who dared to come near his land. "This is creepy," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah, let's get out of here," I replied, feeling more uneasy by the minute. We left the farmhouse and spent the rest of the day trying to enjoy our camping trip. But as night fell again, the strange occurrences started up once more. This time it was worse. We were sitting by the fire, roasting marshmallows, when we heard a loud bang coming from the farmhouse. It sounded like something heavy had fallen. Sarah and I exchanged worried glances. "I'm not going back in there," she said firmly. "Me neither," I agreed. But the noises didn't stop. We heard whispers, footsteps, and even what sounded like someone sobbing. It was like the farmhouse was coming alive with the spirits of the past. Suddenly, our campfire went out, as if someone had poured water on it. We scrambled to relight it, but the matches wouldn't catch. The air around us felt charged, like before a thunderstorm. "We need to leave," Sarah said, her voice shaking. I nodded, but just as we started to pack up, we saw him. Standing at the edge of the woods, illuminated by the moonlight, was a ghostly figure. It was an old man, with a stern face and eyes that seemed to burn with anger. He was dressed in old-fashioned farming clothes, and he looked right at us. "It's him," I whispered. "Mr. Thompson." The ghost didn't move, but his presence was terrifying. We grabbed our things and ran to the car, not looking back. As we sped away, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the farmhouse fading into the distance. The ghost was still standing there, watching us leave. We didn't stop until we reached a gas station miles away. We told the attendant what happened, and he gave us a knowing look. "You're not the first to see old Mr. Thompson," he said. "That land's cursed. Best to stay away." We drove home in silence, both of us shaken by what we had experienced. We never went back to that area, and we never spoke of it again. But sometimes on quiet nights I can still hear those slow, heavy footsteps in my mind. And I wonder, is Mr. Thompson still out there guarding his land? This happened to me and my family a few years ago when we decided to spend our 4th of July weekend at an isolated cabin in the deep woods. It was supposed to be a fun and relaxing getaway, but it ended up being everything but that. It was a sunny Friday morning when we packed up the car and headed out. It was me, my mom, dad, and little sister, Emma. We were all excited about spending the weekend in nature, away from the hustle and bustle of the city. The cabin was a bit old but cozy, surrounded by thick trees and the sounds of wildlife. It was perfect, or so we thought. The first day went great. We roasted marshmallows, played some board games, and just enjoyed being together. The cabin didn't have any Wi-Fi or cell service, but that was part of the charm. It was nice to disconnect for a while. On the second day, we decided to go for a hike. We'd found a trail that led deep into the woods. Mom packed us a picnic, and we set off with high spirits. The path was a little overgrown, but it was beautiful. Birds were singing, and the sunlight filtered through the leaves, making everything look magical. As we walked, we noticed how quiet it got the further we went. The sounds of the forest seemed to fade, leaving us with an eerie silence. Emma, being the curious kid she is, kept pointing out interesting bugs and plants. It was around midday when we found a small clearing and decided to have our picnic. While we were eating, I can't really describe it. It felt like we were being watched. It was that unsettling feeling you get when you're sure someone's eyes are on you, but you can't see anyone around. I brushed it off, thinking it was just my imagination. After lunch, we packed up and started heading back. That's when things got really creepy. About halfway back, we heard rustling in the bushes. My dad, always the brave one, told us to stay put while he went to check it out. He stepped off the trail and into the underbrush, calling out, "Hello? Is anyone there?" There was no response, just more rustling. After what felt like forever, Dad came back, shaking his head. "Must have been an animal," he said, but I could tell he was uneasy. We hurried along, trying to laugh off the incident, but the tension in the air was palpable. We were almost back to the cabin when we saw him, a man, standing right in the middle of the trail. He was dirty, with long matted hair and wild eyes that seemed to bore into us. His clothes were torn, and he had a crazed look on his face. "Can I help you?" my dad asked, trying to sound calm. The man just stood there staring. Then he started mumbling something we couldn't understand. He took a step forward, and we all instinctively took a step back. "Let's go," Mom whispered, grabbing Emma's hand. We turned to head back the way we came, but the man moved to block our path. "What do you want?" Dad asked, his voice trembling a bit now. The man didn't answer. Instead, he pulled a knife from his pocket. My heart started pounding in my chest. We were miles away from anyone, with no way to call for help. Dad stepped in front of us, trying to shield us from the maniac. "We don't want any trouble, Saur," he said. "We're just trying to get back to our cabin." The man laughed, a creepy, unsettling sound that sent chills down my spine. He lunged at us, and Dad shoved him back with all his strength. "Run!" Dad yelled. We didn't need to be told twice. We took off through the woods, branches whipping at our faces and legs. I could hear the man crashing through the underbrush behind us, yelling incoherently. My heart felt like it was going to explode. We burst out of the trees and into the clearing where the cabin stood. Mom fumbled with the keys, her hands shaking. Finally, she got the door open, and we all tumbled inside. Dad slammed the door shut and locked it, his breath coming in ragged gasps. For a few moments, we just stood there trying to catch our breath. Then we heard it, a soft tapping at the window. I turned to see the man standing there, his face pressed against the glass, a twisted grin on his face. We backed away slowly, trying to think of what to do. We had no phone to call for help, and the nearest neighbors were miles away. The man moved from window to window, peering in, looking for a way inside. The doors and windows were locked, but how long could they hold? Dad grabbed a fire poker from the fireplace, while Mom found a heavy cast-iron skillet. Emma and I huddled together, trying to stay calm. After what felt like hours, the tapping stopped. We listened, holding our breath, but there was only silence. Had he given up? Was he gone? Dad motioned for us to stay put while he checked around the cabin. He moved slowly, cautiously, peeking out each window. When he got to the back door, he froze. The door was slightly ajar. He motioned for us to be quiet and gestured for us to move to the far corner of the room. We huddled together, eyes wide with fear. Dad tightened his grip on the fire poker and inched towards the back door. The silence was deafening. Every creak of the floorboard sounded like thunder. Dad reached the door and pushed it open. There was no one there, just the dark woods stretching out beyond the cabin. Relief washed over us. Maybe he had left. Maybe he realized we weren't worth the trouble. But just as we started to relax, we heard it. A low, guttural growl from the shadows. Dad swung the fire poker, and the maniac lunged out of the darkness. They struggled, crashing into furniture, knocking over a lamp. Mom screamed, raising the skillet high and bringing it down on the man's head with a sickening thud. He crumpled to the floor, unconscious. We tied him up with whatever we could find. Ropes, belts, anything to keep him restrained. Dad checked his pulse, making sure he was still alive. We weren't murderers after all. Just a terrified family trying to survive. Morning couldn't come fast enough. As soon as the sun rose, Dad went for help. It took hours, but he finally returned with the police. They took the maniac away, assuring us he would be locked up for a long time. We packed up our things and left the cabin that day, and we never went back after that. Thanks for watching. Don't miss out on more spine-chilling tales. Subscribe now for weekly scares. Hit that red button and join our journey into the unknown.